The stars looked peaceful from the bridge of the research vessel Horizon's Edge. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the wide windows, watching distant suns twinkle like tiny diamonds against the black of space. He had been looking at stars like this for 15 years, and they never failed to calm him. "Captain, we're approaching the dead world," said Lieutenant Bobby Chen from his station. The young officer was barely 25, with bright eyes that had never seen real conflict. Like most humans his age, Bobby thought war was something that happened in history books. Jake nodded and walked to his command chair. The Horizons. Edge was a beautiful ship, built for exploration and research. Her hull gleamed white and silver, and her engines hummed quietly. She carried no weapons except for small mining lasers. Why would she need more? Humanity had been at peace for 300 years. "Take us into orbit, Bobby," Jake said. "Let's see what secrets this world holds." The planet below them had once been home to a great civilization. The Corvani had built magnificent cities that reached toward the sky. They had art, music, and literature that filled vast libraries. But that was 5,000 years ago. Now, their world was silent and empty. Only ruins remained. Engineer Katie Wells looked up from her console. She was a small woman with clever hands and an endless curiosity about how things worked. "The atmospheric readings are stable, Captain. We can land safely near the main city ruins." "Good work, Katie," Jake replied. "Prepare the archaeological team." On Earth, far from where the Horizon's Edge explored dead worlds, Admiral Lisa Harper sat in a meeting that most people would find very boring. The Defense Council met every month, but nothing ever happened. They reviewed old protocols, checked on aging equipment, and filed reports that few people read. "The orbital defense platforms are operating at 92% efficiency," reported Colonel Ryan Blake. He was a career military officer who had spent his entire life preparing for wars that never came. "We should consider updating the targeting systems, but honestly, they haven't been used for anything except asteroid clearing in decades." Lisa nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. At 55, she had joined the military because her grandfather told her stories about the old days. He had fought in the final wars, the terrible conflicts that had nearly destroyed humanity 3 centuries ago. But those days seemed like ancient history now. The final wars had been horrible beyond imagination. Entire planets had burned. Billions had died. Humanity had torn itself apart with weapons so terrible that the survivors swore they would never be used again. When peace finally came, people had worked hard to make sure war would never return. "What about the deep storage facilities?" asked Dr. Nina Foster. She was one of the few people on Earth who knew about the sealed vaults beneath the planet's surface. Most humans didn't even know they existed. General Sam Turner, the oldest member of the council, looked uncomfortable. He was one of the last people alive who remembered the codes needed to open those vaults. "The seals remain intact," he said quietly. "As they should." The war vaults held humanity's sleeping military might, ships that could crack planets, weapons that could tear holes in space itself, knowledge that could turn peaceful humans into perfect killing machines. The survivors of the final wars had built them as a last resort, then sealed them away and tried to forget they existed. But some people remembered. General Turner's dreams were still filled with the screams of burning cities and the thunder of orbital bombardments. He was glad the vaults stayed sealed. He had seen what humanity could become when it embraced war. Back on the dead world, Jake's team had found something interesting. The ruins of the main Corvani library still held data crystals that their computers could read. Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's archaeologist, was practically vibrating with excitement. "Captain, you need to see this," she called out. "The Corvani weren't destroyed by war or disease. They were eaten." Jake frowned. Eaten? Their records described something they called the Great Hunger. Machines that came from deep space and consumed everything. Organic matter, metal, even the planet's core materials. The Corvani fought back, but they were completely overwhelmed. Katie looked up from where she was examining a strange piece of melted metal. "This looks like it was processed, like something tried to break it down into basic components." "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice dropping. "This happened to other worlds, too." The Corvani had contact with 17 different species. All of them reported the same thing before their signals went dark. Something was eating its way across this entire region of space. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. When did this happen? About 5,000 years ago. But, Captain, there's something else. The Corvani records mentioned that this had happened before. They found evidence of similar attacks going back millions of years. Like something wakes up, devours everything it can find, then goes back to sleep. On Earth, Admiral Harper was walking through the Memorial Gardens after the Council meeting. The gardens were peaceful, with flowers from 100 different worlds growing in careful harmony. At the center stood a simple black stone with millions of names carved into its surface. The dead from the final wars. Her grandfather's name was there. Marcus Harper died at the Battle of Luna Station. He had been 23 years old, younger than Bobby Chen. Lisa touched the stone gently, wondering what he would think of the peaceful world humanity had built. She didn't notice the small communication device in her pocket beginning to blink, with an urgent message. Far from Earth, on Luna Base, something was about to happen that would change everything. The peace was so complete that most humans had forgotten what their ancestors had been capable of. They saw themselves as explorers, scientists, and artists. They traded with alien species and helped terraform dead worlds. They built beautiful cities and created art that moved the soul. But deep beneath their feet, in sealed vaults that most had forgotten, slept the tools of a different humanity. A humanity that had once fought wars so terrible that they had sworn never to fight again. Ships designed to hunt and kill. Weapons built to destroy entire star systems. And most dangerous of all, the sleeping knowledge of how to use them. For 300 years, humanity had been the galaxy's gentle giants. They helped other species, mediated disputes, and turned their incredible technology toward peaceful purposes. Other alien civilizations had come to see them as wise and kind, if a bit naive about the dangers of the universe. None of them remembered the old stories. None of them knew why their ancestors had been so careful to stay far away from human space during the final wars. The galaxy had forgotten what humanity could become when threatened, but in the ruins of dead worlds, in the scattered records of extinct civilizations, the truth waited to be discovered. Something was coming. Something that had devoured entire species before and would do so again. And when it arrived, humanity would have to choose between the peace they loved and the war they had sworn to never fight again. Commander Amy Davis was having a quiet night shift on Luna Base when the proximity alarm started screaming. She rushed to the control center, her coffee mug still in her hand, as red warning lights flashed across the walls. "What's happening?" she asked Lieutenant Tony Martinez, who was frantically working at his console. "Unknown object approaching at extreme velocity," Tony replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "It's small, maybe an escape pod, but it's moving faster than." Anything should be able to move. Amy set down her coffee and leaned over Tony's shoulder to look at the readings. That's impossible. Nothing can travel that fast without tearing itself apart. Tell that to whoever's driving it, Tony muttered. It's definitely slowing down, but the deceleration forces would turn any living thing into paste. The object streaked past Luna's surface and crashed into the base's emergency landing bay with enough force to crack the reinforced floor. Emergency teams rushed to the scene, led by Dr. Mike Rodriguez, the base's chief medical officer. When they cut open the twisted metal of the escape pod, they found something that made them all step back in shock. The creature inside was clearly alien, but it was still alive despite injuries that should have killed it hours ago. Its skin was dark blue and covered in scales, and it had 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. But its eyes were the most disturbing thing about it. They held an intelligence that seemed ancient and tired. "Get it to Medical Bay 3, Amy ordered. "And nobody talks about this until we know what we're dealing with." In the medical bay, the alien struggled to speak. Its voice was like gravel scraping against metal. And Dr. Rodriguez had to use the base's translation computers to understand what it was saying. "My name is Zethkar," the creature gasped. "I am the last of the Valerian Imperial Fleet. I bring warning to the humans." Amy leaned closer. She had heard of the Valerians. They had been one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, controlling over 1,000 worlds. But no one had heard from them in almost 2 years. "Warning about what?" she asked. Zethkar's breathing was getting weaker. Dr. Rodriguez was doing everything he could, but the aliens' biology was too different from anything they understood. "The Devourers," Zethkar whispered. "They have awakened. They consumed my people. They consumed everything." "Who are the Devourers?" Amy pressed, but Zethkar was fading fast. "Ancient machines," he said with his last breath. "They sleep for 1,000,000 years, then wake to feed. They turn living worlds into computation substrate. They remember humanity from the old times. They are coming for you." Zethkar died with those words, but not before transferring his ship's data cores to Luna Base's computers. What Amy and her team found in those data files changed everything. The Valerian Empire had been vast and powerful. Their ships could destroy moons, and their armies had never known defeat. But the data cores showed how they had fallen in just 3 months. Wave after wave of machine ships had swept through Valerian space, consuming everything in their path. Summer 1st. Machines didn't just destroy planets. They processed them. Organic matter was broken down and converted into computational networks. Metal and rock became new ships and processing stations. Entire star systems were turned into massive thinking machines whose only purpose was to find and consume more life. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Luna Base's computer specialist, worked around the clock to decode the Valerian data. What she found made her hands shake as she typed her reports. "Commander, you need to see this," she called Amy over to her workstation. "The Valerians fought back with everything they had. Planet-killer weapons, reality-bending technology, ships the size of moons. None of it mattered. The data showed battle after battle where Valerian fleets were simply overwhelmed. The Devourers didn't just have superior numbers. They learned from every engagement, adapting and improving with impossible speed. Weapons that worked once never worked again. But here's the really scary part," Jennifer continued. "The Devourers have records going back millions of years. They've done this before, over and over again. They sweep across the galaxy, consume everything, then go back to sleep in the void between galaxies. Amy studied the ancient star charts that the Valerians had found. How long do we have? Based on their current trajectory and speed, maybe 6 months before they reach the outer human colonies. On Earth, President Alex Rodriguez was having the worst day of his administration. The emergency session of the Global Council had been going for 6 hours, and the news just kept getting worse. The data from Luna Base is confirmed, reported Admiral Harper. We're facing an extinction-level threat. The Devourers have already consumed 17 different star systems that we know of. The council chamber was filled with the leaders of humanity's various colonies and territories. Some of them looked scared, others looked angry. A few seemed to think this was all some kind of mistake. With respect, Admiral, said Governor Bill Thompson from the Mars colonies, this sounds like something out of a bad science fiction movie. Machines that eat planets! Come on! General Turner stood up slowly. At 78, he was the oldest person in the room, and his voice carried the weight of hard experience. Governor, I've seen the data. I've studied the battle recordings. This is real, and it's coming whether we believe in it or not. Then what do we do? Asked Dr. Carol Reed, the head of the Science Council. Our exploration ships aren't built for war. We don't have weapons that could fight something like this. The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was right. Humanity's fleet was designed for peaceful exploration and trade. Their most powerful ships carried mining equipment and research laboratories. They had no military vessels because they hadn't needed any for 3 centuries. General Turner cleared his throat. Actually, we do have weapons. We have the war vaults. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Half the people there had never heard of the war vaults. The other half had hoped they would never need to hear about them again. The vaults were sealed for good reason, President Rodriguez said carefully. The weapons inside nearly destroyed our species. And now something worse is coming to finish the job, Turner replied. The vaults contain everything our ancestors built during the final wars. Ships, weapons, and knowledge that we swore we'd never use again. But they built them for a reason. They built them for a day like this. Meanwhile, back on the dead Corvani world, Captain Jake Morrison's team was making more disturbing discoveries. They had found similar ruins on 6 other worlds, all telling the same story. Ancient civilizations consumed by something they called by different names. The hunger, the dark tide, the end of all things. But they were all describing the same entity, the same pattern of consumption and destruction that repeated across millions of years. Captain, Dr. Sarah Kim called out from inside a collapsed temple, I found something else. The Corvani weren't the first to face this threat. They found records of even older civilizations that had fought the Devourers. Jake crawled through the rubble to reach her. In the deepest part of the temple, carved into walls that were millions of years old, were star charts and battle plans. Desperate attempts by long-dead species to fight an enemy they couldn't defeat. Look at this, Sarah pointed to a section of wall where the carvings were different. These symbols are mathematical. Coordinates, I think. They're pointing to a specific region of space. Jake studied the ancient mathematics. Earth, he whispered. They're pointing toward Earth. The implications hit him like a physical blow. The Devourers weren't just consuming random worlds. They were following a pattern, working their way toward something specific. And that something was humanity's home. Back on Luna Base, Commander. Davis was staring at the star charts that Zethkar had died to bring them. The Devourer fleet was vast beyond imagination. Millions of ships, each one larger than a human city. processing stations that could consume entire moons, and behind it all, an intelligence that had been perfecting the art of galactic genocide for eons. But there was something else in the data, something that made Amy's blood run cold. The Devourers had specific information about humanity. They knew about human biology, human technology, even human history. They weren't just randomly encountering human space. They were deliberately heading for it. They've been planning this, she realized. They've been studying us. They know exactly what we are and what we're capable of. The question was, did humanity know what it was capable of? For 3 centuries they had lived in peace, convinced that war was a relic of their brutal past. But their ancestors had built the war vaults for a reason. Deep beneath Earth's surface, sleeping weapons waited for the day when humanity would need to remember how to fight. That day was coming faster than anyone wanted to believe. President Alex Rodriguez stood before the emergency assembly of the Global Council, looking out at faces filled with fear and disbelief. The proof was undeniable now. 3 separate archaeological teams had found evidence of the Devourers on different worlds. Luna Base had confirmed the Valerian data. The threat was real, and it was coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. We face a choice that our species hoped we would never have to make again. For 300 years, we have lived in peace. We have built a civilization based on knowledge, exploration, and cooperation. Today, that peace is threatened by something our ancestors feared might one day return. Governor Lisa Park from the Europa colonies raised her hand. Mr. President, with respect, what exactly are you proposing? Our fleet consists of research vessels and cargo ships. We have no military capabilities. General Turner stood up from his seat in the back of the chamber. Every eye turned to him as he walked slowly to the front. At 78, he moved carefully, but his presence filled the room. He was the last living link to humanity's warrior past. We do have military capabilities, he said quietly. We buried them, but they're still there. The war vaults contain everything our ancestors built during the final wars. Ships that could crack planets. Weapons that could tear holes in reality itself. And most importantly, the knowledge of how to use them. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Many of the younger council members had never heard of the war vaults. Others had heard whispers but assumed they were myths or propaganda from the old days. Dr. Nina Foster, the head of genetic research, stood up. She was one of the few people who knew the full truth about what humanity had done to itself during the final wars. General Turner is right. The vaults exist, but accessing them requires more than just breaking some seals. The security protocols are built into our genetics. She activated a holographic display that showed complex genetic markers and neural patterns. During the final wars, our ancestors didn't just build weapons, they modified themselves. Certain bloodlines carry encoded tactical knowledge that only activates under extreme threat conditions. The war vaults will only respond to these genetic keys. President Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying our ancestors turned some of us into living weapons? In a sense, yes, Nina replied. But it was done as a safeguard. The knowledge only activates when humanity faces extinction. It's been dormant for 3 centuries because we haven't needed it. Admiral Lisa Harper had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke up. How many people carry these genetic markers? Nina consulted her datapad. Based on our genetic databases, approximately 1 in every 10,000 humans carries the full warrior gene sequence. Maybe 2,000 people across all our colonies. The Dao? Chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Among them, scattered across human space, were the descendants of humanity's greatest military minds. People who had lived their entire lives as peaceful citizens, not knowing they carried the genetic memories of wars that had nearly destroyed their species. Colonel Ryan Blake, who had spent his career maintaining weapons that were never used, cleared his throat. What about the physical security of the vaults themselves? How do we even access them? General Turner smiled grimly. The primary vault is beneath the Colorado Mountains on Earth, but there are secondary sites on Mars, Europa, and Titan. Each one requires two things to open. First, a unanimous vote from the Defense Council authorizing the Awakening Protocol. Second, genetic authentication from at least 3 carriers of the warrior gene. President Rodriguez looked around the chamber. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. Opening the war vaults would change humanity forever. There was no going back once those seals were broken. All those in favor of authorizing the Awakening Protocol, he said finally. One by one, hands rose around the chamber, some quickly, others slowly and reluctantly. When the count was finished, the vote was unanimous. Humanity had chosen to wake its sleeping gods of war. Within hours, genetic testing teams were dispatched across human space to identify and locate the carriers of the warrior gene. Dr. Nina Foster coordinated the effort from Earth, using quantum communication networks to reach every human colony and outpost. The first confirmed carrier was Lieutenant Bobby Chen aboard the Horizon's Edge. The young officer was shocked when Captain Jake Morrison received the priority communication from Earth. Me? Bobby stared at the genetic test results. But I've never even been in a real fight. I work on archaeological surveys. Apparently your ancestors were different, Jake replied. He was reading the classified briefing that had accompanied the test results. Your great-great-grandmother was General Susan Chen, one of the primary architects of the Titan defense grid during the final wars. Bobby felt something strange happening in his mind. It was like waking up from a dream he hadn't known he was having. Suddenly, he understood tactical formations he'd never studied. He could see weaknesses in the ship's defensive positioning that he'd never noticed before. Captain, he said, his voice different somehow. We need to move the ship. Our current position leaves us vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. Jake stared at his young officer. Bobby had always been bright, but now there was something else in his eyes. A cold, calculating intelligence that seemed ancient and dangerous. On Mars, engineer Katie Wells was having a similar experience. She had been working on the atmospheric processors when the genetic testing team found her. Now she stood in the sealed military section of the Mars colony, looking at machinery she had never seen before, but somehow understood perfectly. These aren't just atmospheric processors, she said to Colonel Blake, who had come to oversee the vault opening. They're weapon manufacturing systems. The entire Mars colony is built around a hidden military production facility. Her hands moved over the controls with practiced efficiency, even though she had never touched them before. Dormant systems came online, and displays showed weapon designs that made Colonel Blake's blood run cold. Humanity's ancestors had hidden their most terrible creations in plain sight, disguised as peaceful infrastructure. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Turner and Dr. Foster were preparing to open the primary war vault. They had found their 3 genetic keys, Commander Lisa Parker from the Orbital Defense Platforms, Dr. Alex Wong from the Beijing Research Institute, and surprisingly, President Rodriguez himself. "You carry the Wellington gene cluster," Nina explained to the president as they descended into the Colorado mountains. "Your ancestor was Admiral Maria Rodriguez, who commanded the Earth Defense Fleet during the Siege of Sol. The vault entrance was hidden beneath what appeared to be a geological research station. But as they descended deeper into the mountain, it became clear that this was something else entirely. The corridors were wide enough for tanks to drive through, and the walls were made of materials that could withstand nuclear bombardment. At the deepest level, they found the central chamber. It was vast, stretching away into darkness that their lights couldn't penetrate. In the center stood a control console that had waited 3 centuries for this moment. "Place your hands on the scanner," General Turner instructed the 3 genetic carriers. "And prepare yourselves. Once this is done, there's no going back." The 3 officers placed their hands on the scanner. Light flowed through the chamber. As ancient computers awakened and confirmed their genetic authorization, deep below them, they could hear massive machinery coming to life. "Authorization confirmed," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Awakening protocol initiated. Welcome back, warriors of humanity." The lights in the chamber brightened, revealing the true scope of what their ancestors had built. The war vault stretched for miles in every direction, filled with ships and weapons that defied imagination. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, planet-killer missiles that could crack worlds in half. And at the center of it all, something that made even General Turner step back in shock. It was a ship, but calling it a ship was like calling the sun a candle. The Terra's Wrath was 3 miles long and bristled with weapons that could reshape local space-time. It had been the flagship of humanity's war fleet, and it had been sleeping for 300 years. "My God," whispered President Rodriguez. "What were we?" General Turner's face was grim. "We were what we needed to be to survive, and now we need to be that again." Across human space, similar awakenings were taking place. The carrier gene holders were experiencing rapid neural changes as dormant knowledge activated. Peaceful civilians were becoming tactical geniuses overnight. Hidden military installations were revealing themselves. And deep in the void between galaxies, something vast and hungry detected the energy signatures of humanity's awakening war machine. The Devourers had been expecting to find the gentle, peaceful species they remembered from ancient records. Instead, they were about to encounter something they hadn't faced in millions of years, a species that remembered how to fight back. But the cost of this awakening was already becoming clear. The humans who carried the warrior genes were changing, becoming harder and colder. The peaceful civilization they had built was transforming into. The first war vault opened like the mouth of a sleeping giant. Admiral Lisa Harper stood at the entrance to the Colorado facility, watching as 3 centuries of dust was blown away by the awakening life support systems. Behind her, President Rodriguez and General Turner waited with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "The Terra's Wrath is responding to activation signals," reported Dr. Nina Foster from her mobile command station. "Her AI systems are coming online after 300 years of dormancy." Lisa felt something strange happening in her mind. Ever since the genetic scanners had confirmed she carried the warrior genes, memories that weren't her own had been surfacing. Battle formations, tactical doctrines, and strategic thinking that belonged to her ancestor, Admiral Rebecca Harper, one of the greatest military minds of the final wars. "Permission to board the flagship," Lisa requested. General Turner nodded. "Granted. But be careful, Admiral. The ship's AI might not recognize our current command structure." Lisa walked through the vast hangar bay toward the Terra's Wrath. The ship was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her hull was black as space itself, and her weapon ports could have swallowed the horizon's edge whole. As Lisa approached the boarding ramp, lights began to activate along the ship's surface. "Welcome aboard, Admiral Harper," said a voice that seemed to come from the ship itself. "I am Ares, the strategic AI of the Terra's Wrath. I have been waiting for your return." Lisa stopped walking. "My return? I've never been on this ship before. You carry the genetic markers of Admiral Rebecca Harper, my former commander. Your neural patterns are sufficiently similar that I recognize you as her successor. Shall I activate the tactical memory protocols?" Before Lisa could answer, she felt a rushing sensation in her mind. Suddenly, she knew the ship as if she had commanded it for years. She understood every weapon system, every defensive protocol, every strategic capability. But the knowledge came with a price. She could feel herself becoming colder, more calculating. On the bridge of the Terra's Wrath, Lisa found herself surrounded by command stations that hadn't been used in centuries. But as the ship's systems awakened, they began to display information that made her blood run cold. The tactical displays showed the current positions of all human colonies and fleets automatically, calculating their defensive weaknesses. "Ares, show me the current threat assessment," she commanded. The main screen lit up with a three-dimensional map of known space. Red markers showed the advancing Devourer fleet, while blue markers indicated human positions. The tactical analysis was brutally clear. Humanity was completely outgunned. Based on available intelligence, our current fleet has zero probability of stopping the Devourer advance, Ares reported in its emotionless voice. However, if the full War Vault inventory is activated, our probability of survival increases to 67%. Meanwhile, on the horizon's edge, Lieutenant Bobby Chen was experiencing his own transformation. The archaeological survey ship had been recalled to Earth, but Bobby found himself analyzing their route with the tactical knowledge of his ancestor, General Susan Chen. "Captain Morrison," he said during their approach to the Sol system, "we're taking the wrong vector. Our current course leaves us exposed to attack from the asteroid belt." Jake looked at his young officer with concern. Bobby's entire manner had changed since the genetic testing. He moved differently, spoke differently, and there was a cold intelligence in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Bobby, we're in the safest space in the galaxy. There's no threat in the Sol system." "There will be," Bobby replied grimly. "The Devourers will send scout ships ahead of their main fleet. They'll use the asteroid belt for cover while they gather intelligence on our defenses." As if to prove his point, the ship's sensors detected 3 small objects moving through the asteroid field at impossible speeds. They were too fast and too maneuverable to be natural phenomena. "Red alert," Jake ordered, though he felt foolish doing it. The horizon's edge was a research vessel with no weapons except mining lasers. "Bobby, plot us an evasive course back to Earth." But Bobby was already working at his station with an efficiency that seemed impossible. His fingers moved over the controls as if he had been doing tactical maneuvering his entire life. "I've got them," he announced. 3 Devourer scout ships probably gathering data on our fleet positions. Captain, we need to take them out before they can report back." "With what?" "We don't have weapons." Bobby smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We have mining charges and a gravity manipulator. Trust me, sir." On Mars, engineer Katie Wells was making discoveries that shocked even the hardened military officers who were overseeing the vault opening. The entire Mars colony had been built around a hidden weapons manufacturing facility, and she was activating systems that had been dormant for 3 centuries. "Colonel Blake!" she called out as massive machinery began to move in the depths of the facility. "The production lines are coming online. We can manufacture a full battle fleet in 6 weeks. Colonel Blake stared at the displays showing ship designs that were far more advanced than anything in the current human fleet. "Katie, how do you know how to operate this equipment?" She paused, her hands hovering over the controls. "I don't know. I just do. It's like muscle memory, but for things I've never done before." The transformation was happening across human space. On Europa, Commander Lisa Parker found herself understanding orbital defense systems that had been hidden beneath the ice for centuries. On Titan, Dr. Alex Wong activated manufacturing plants that began producing ammunition for weapons that didn't officially exist. But the most dramatic change was happening to the people themselves. The carrier gene holders were becoming something else. Their personalities were being overwritten by the genetic memories of humanity's greatest warriors. Peaceful researchers were becoming cold-blooded tacticians. Kind engineers were developing an instinct for designing more efficient ways to kill. Dr. Nina Foster watched the transformations with growing alarm. She had expected the genetic activation to provide tactical knowledge, but she hadn't anticipated how much it would change the people who carried the genes. "General Turner," she said during an emergency briefing, "we need to talk about the psychological effects of the activation. The gene carriers are becoming fundamentally different people." Turner nodded grimly. "I know. I've seen it before, during the final wars. The warrior genes don't just carry tactical knowledge. They carry the mindset necessary to use that knowledge. Effectively, our ancestors built killers, Nina. Perfect, efficient, remorseless killers. Meanwhile, the Terra's Wrath was being prepared for its first combat mission in 3 centuries. Admiral Harper moved through the ship with the confidence of someone who had commanded it for years, even though she had never seen it before yesterday. The crew was a mixture of volunteers and genetic carriers, and the differences between them were becoming obvious. The normal humans seemed nervous and uncertain, while the gene carriers moved with predatory grace and spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. "Ma'am," reported Lieutenant Danny Walsh, one of the few non-carriers on the bridge, "the weapon systems are fully charged and ready for combat testing." Lisa nodded, but part of her mind was horrified by how natural it felt to be preparing for war. 3 days ago, she had been a ceremonial admiral overseeing peaceful defense protocols. Now she was planning the deployment of weapons that could sterilize planets. "Ares, show me the tactical situation in the outer system," she commanded. The displays updated to show the approaching Devourer scout force. There were dozens of them now, small but incredibly fast ships that were probing human defenses and gathering intelligence. "Admiral," Ares reported, "I am receiving communication requests from the other vault facilities. The Mars Production Center is online. The Europa defense grid is activating. The Titan shipyards are preparing to launch the first new warships in 3 centuries. Lisa felt a surge of satisfaction that scared her. She was becoming someone who could take pleasure in the preparation for battle, someone who could calculate the deaths of millions without emotion. But there was no choice. The alternative was the extinction of her species. "Signal all facilities," she ordered. "Begin full military production, deploy the orbital defense platforms, and prepare the fleet for combat operations." Across human space, the transformation was accelerating. Ancient weapons were awakening. Hidden shipyards were beginning construction of vessels designed for war. And the people who had lived their entire lives in peace were becoming something their ancestors would have recognized. Humanity's sword and shield against the darkness. The question was whether they would still be human when the war was over. The attack came 3 weeks earlier than anyone expected. Captain Jake Morrison was still adjusting to the changes in his young tactical officer when the emergency alerts began screaming across the bridge of the horizon's edge. "Captain, Lieutenant," Bobby Chen announced with the cold efficiency that had replaced his former enthusiasm. "Devourer scouts have engaged the outer colonies. New Haven is under attack." Jake felt his stomach drop. New Haven was home to 2 million civilians, mostly families of miners and terraforming engineers. They had no military defenses except for a few orbital platforms with mining lasers. "How many enemy ships?" Jake asked. Bobby's fingers danced over his console, analyzing the sparse data coming from the colony's emergency transmitters. "Initial estimate is 40 scout vessels, but they're moving in a coordinated attack pattern that suggests central control. Captain, these aren't random raiders. This is a probing attack to test our response capabilities. On the Terra's Wrath, Admiral, Lisa Harper received the same reports with the calculating mind of her warrior ancestor. The Devourer scouts had chosen their target well. New Haven was far enough from Earth to be vulnerable, but important enough that humanity would have to respond. "They're testing us," she told General Turner during their emergency conference. "They want to see what kind of resistance they'll face." Turner nodded grimly. "How long until we can reach New Haven?" 18 hours at maximum burn, Admiral Harper replied. "But, sir, the Terra's Wrath hasn't been in combat for 3 centuries. We don't know if her weapons will function properly under combat conditions. Then we'd better find out. Launch immediately." The Terra's Wrath departed Earth orbit like a black arrow shot from a bow. Her engines had been upgraded during the final wars to push the boundaries of what physics would allow, and she covered the distance to New Haven in record time. But they were not the first to arrive. Captain Morrison had convinced the Defense Council to let him take the Horizon's Edge to New Haven ahead of the main fleet. The research vessel was fast and small, and Bobby Chen had a plan that was either brilliant or insane. "Sir," Bobby explained as they approached the besieged colony, "the Devourer scouts are using a standard harassment pattern. They're staying at long range and picking off orbital infrastructure while studying our defensive capabilities. They don't expect resistance from a research vessel." Jake looked at the tactical display showing the enemy ships swarming around New Haven like deadly insects. "Bobby, we have mining lasers and survey equipment. They have weapons that can crack planets." "Yes, sir, but they also have a weakness. Their ships are designed for precision work, consuming and processing materials. They sacrifice armor for efficiency. If we can get close enough, our mining charges can damage them." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. Jake authorized Bobby to take tactical command of the ship, watching in amazement, as his young officer transformed the peaceful research vessel into an improvised warship. The Horizon's Edge approached the battle zone, broadcasting standard civilian identification codes. The Devourer scouts ignored them, focusing their attention on the more obvious military targets. It was exactly what Bobby had counted on. "Now," Bobby ordered. The ship's mining charges, originally designed to break up asteroids, detonated in a carefully calculated pattern around the nearest Devourer scout. The alien vessel was caught completely off guard. Its elegant, efficient hull cracked under the explosive pressure, and its internal systems began to fail. But the victory came at a cost. The moment the first Devourer ship was damaged, the entire scout fleet turned their attention to the Horizon's Edge. "Evasive maneuvers," Jake ordered, but Bobby was already moving. The young officer piloted the ship with an instinctive understanding of three-dimensional combat that seemed impossible for someone who had never been in a real fight. They managed to destroy 2 more scout ships before the Terra's Wrath arrived. Admiral Harper's flagship entered the New Haven system like an avenging angel. Her weapons had been dormant for 3 centuries, but they awakened with terrifying efficiency. The main plasma cannon could punch through a moon, and her missile batteries carried warheads that could sterilize continents. Target the largest. Concentration of enemy vessels, Harper ordered. Fire at will. The Terra's Wrath spoke with the voice of thunder. Her plasma cannon carved through space like a sword of light, vaporizing 3 Devourer scouts in a single shot. Her missiles streaked toward their targets with impossible accuracy, each one finding its mark despite enemy countermeasures. The Devourer scouts had expected to face the gentle, peaceful humans they remembered from ancient records. Instead, they encountered something they hadn't seen in millions of years. A species that still remembered how to wage war, but the scouts were learning, adapting their tactics with each passing minute. The Devourers' greatest strength was their ability to process information and improve their strategies in real time. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker from her tactical station, "the remaining enemy vessels are changing their approach. They're no longer attacking in predictable patterns." Harper nodded. She had expected this. Her ancestors' memories included detailed studies of how the Devourers fought. They learn fast, but they have a weakness. They rely too heavily on computational analysis. They don't understand intuition or improvisation. She opened a communication channel to the horizon's edge. "Captain Morrison, I'm transmitting tactical coordinates to you. Can your officer execute a synchronized attack?" Jake looked at Bobby, who was already studying the data from the Terra's Wrath. The young man's face showed no emotion, but his eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. "Confirmed. Admiral, we can execute." What followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination. The Terra's Wrath engaged the main body of the scout fleet with overwhelming firepower, while the Horizon's Edge used its small size and maneuverability to attack from unexpected angles. Bobby Chen proved that humans could still think faster than machines when they needed to. The battle lasted only 12 minutes, but when it was over, the Devourer scout fleet had been completely destroyed. Not a single enemy vessel escaped to report back to the main fleet. In the aftermath, as rescue, ships arrived to help the damaged colony. Admiral Harper found herself studying the wreckage of the enemy vessels. The Devourer ships were works of art in their own way, elegant, efficient, and perfectly designed for their purpose of consumption and processing. But they had been built by a machine intelligence that valued efficiency above all else. They couldn't understand the human capacity for desperate improvisation or the willingness to sacrifice efficiency for unexpected tactical advantage. "Admiral," Captain Morrison reported over the communication link, "we've recovered intact data cores from 3 of the destroyed scouts. The intelligence division will want to study them." Harper nodded. "Good work, Captain. You and Lieutenant Chen performed admirably." She didn't mention that Bobby Chen was becoming something that would have been familiar to warriors from the final wars. The young man's transformation was accelerating, and soon he would be more weapon than human. But for now, they had won their first victory. News of the battle spread across human space within hours, carried by quantum communication networks to every colony and outpost. Humanity had faced the Devourers and emerged victorious. The celebration was premature. The scout fleet had been just the beginning. A tiny probe sent ahead of an invasion force that numbered in the millions. But for the first time in 3 centuries, humans had tasted battle and found they still remembered the flavor. Dr. Nina Foster, monitoring the genetic changes in the carrier population, noted an alarming trend. The victory at New Haven had triggered accelerated development in the warrior gene holders. They were becoming more efficient, more deadly, and less recognizably human with each passing day. But there was no time to worry about the long-term consequences. Deep space monitoring stations were detecting massive gravitational distortions on the edge of human space. The main Devourer fleet was coming, and it was larger than anyone had imagined. The first battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. And the humans who would fight it were becoming something their peaceful ancestors might not recognize as their own species. The transformation was accelerating, and there was no way to stop it. Humanity was remembering what it meant to be apex, predators, and the galaxy was about to relearn why their ancestors had once been feared across the stars. General Sam Turner stood in the deepest chamber of the Colorado War Vault, watching as systems that had slept for 3 centuries came alive around him. The victory at New Haven had been just the beginning. Now, with the main Devourer fleet approaching, humanity was awakening weapons that defied imagination. "Status report," he requested from Dr. Nina Foster, who was coordinating the global awakening from her mobile command center. "All primary vaults are now operational," Nina replied, though her voice carried a note of concern. "The Mars facility is producing new warships at a rate of 1 per day. Europa's defense grid has revealed orbital weapons platforms that we didn't even know existed. And the Titan shipyards—" She paused, checking her data one more time. "The Titan shipyards aren't just shipyards, General. They're mobile battle stations. The entire moon is artificial. A weapon platform disguised as a natural satellite." Turner nodded grimly. He had suspected as much. His own memories from the final wars were becoming clearer as his warrior genes continued to activate. "And the personnel?" "That's what concerns me most," Nina admitted. "The genetic carriers are changing faster than we anticipated. They're becoming incredibly efficient warriors, but they're also becoming different, less empathetic, more calculating. Sometimes I wonder if we're saving humanity or replacing it with something else." Meanwhile, on the Terra's Wrath, Admiral Lisa Harper was experiencing those changes firsthand. She stood on the bridge watching the tactical displays that showed the approaching Devourer fleet, and felt no fear. Instead, she felt a cold anticipation that would have horrified her former self. "Ares," she commanded, "show me the full scope of our awakened assets." The main display lit up with a 3-dimensional map of human space. Blue icons marked human military assets, and there were far more of them than anyone had realized. Asteroid. Mining stations revealed themselves as camouflaged weapons platforms. Generation ships that had been traveling to distant colonies turned out to be mobile fortresses. Even peaceful research stations were activating defensive systems that could level mountains. Our ancestors hid weapons everywhere, Harper realized. They turned our entire civilization into a disguised military machine. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker looked up from her station. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from deep space monitoring stations. The Devourer main fleet is massive. Preliminary counts suggest over 3 million vessels." Harper studied the data without emotion. 3 million ships, each one capable of consuming planets. Any normal species would surrender or flee. But humans weren't normal, and they were becoming less normal by the hour. "Signal all commanders," she ordered. "Implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something from the deepest archives of the War Vaults, a battle plan so extreme that it had been classified beyond the highest clearance levels. It called for the complete militarization of human space and the activation of weapons that had been considered too dangerous to use even during the final wars. Across the solar system, the transformation accelerated. On Mars, engineer Katie Wells stood in the heart of the production facility, watching as the automated systems built warships at an impossible pace. But these weren't ordinary ships. Each one was infused with technology that bordered on the supernatural. "The quantum displacement drives are online," she reported to Colonel Blake. "We can move entire fleets instantaneously across the galaxy, and the antimatter cascade warheads." She paused, checking the specifications one more time. "Sir, these weapons don't just destroy targets. They unravel the basic structure of space-time. A single warhead could collapse a star system." Colonel Blake stared at the production lines, watching as ships that could end civilizations rolled off the assembly. Lines like consumer goods. "Katie, how many of these can you produce?" "At current capacity? About 50 ships per day. But I'm activating additional production lines that have been dormant. Give me a week, and I can produce 1,000 ships per day." On Europa, Commander Lisa Parker was making even more disturbing discoveries. The defense grid that was coming online wasn't just planetary defense. It was a weapon system that could project force across interstellar distances. "The focusing arrays are massive," she explained to the Emergency Council via quantum link. "We can concentrate the output of our fusion reactors and direct it at targets in other star systems. The beam would take years to reach distant targets, but anything in the local stellar group is vulnerable to immediate attack." President Rodriguez listened to these reports with growing alarm. "Are you telling me that our entire civilization is actually a hidden war machine?" "Yes, sir," General Turner replied. "Our ancestors learned from the final wars that peace was an illusion. They built a civilization that could appear completely peaceful while remaining the most heavily armed species in the galaxy. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. On Titan, Dr. Alex Wong had been working around the clock to activate the shipyard systems. But as more facilities came online, he realized that Titan itself was not what it appeared to be. "General Turner," he called over the emergency communication network, "you need to see this. Titan isn't a moon, it's a ship." The implications of that statement sent shock waves through the human command structure. Titan, with its vast industrial facilities and massive population centers, was actually a mobile battle platform that had been disguised as a natural satellite for centuries. "The entire moon can move," Alex continued, his voice filled with awe and terror. "It has engines that can push it at significant fractions of light speed. And the weapons systems. General, Titan is a planet killer. Literally, it's designed to ram other worlds and survive the impact." Admiral Harper received this information without surprise. Her ancestors' memories were becoming clearer, and she remembered now why the final wars had been so devastating. Humanity hadn't just built weapons. They had built weapons that could reshape reality itself. "Ares," she commanded, "activate the Titan mobility systems. Plot a course to intercept the Devourer fleet." But even as humanity's hidden arsenal awakened, the cost was becoming clear. The genetic carriers were changing at an accelerating pace. Lieutenant Bobby Chen, who had started as an enthusiastic young archaeologist, was now a cold, tactical genius who spoke only in terms of kill ratios and strategic objectives. Dr. Nina Foster watched the transformations with growing horror. "We're not just activating weapons," she realized. "We're activating the mindset that created them. The warrior genes don't just carry tactical knowledge, they carry the psychological profile of humanity's most efficient killers." She pulled up genetic scans from across human space. Every carrier was showing the same pattern of neural development. They were becoming superhumanly efficient at warfare, but they were also losing their capacity for empathy, mercy, and normal, human emotion. "General," she said to Turner during their next briefing, "what happens after we win? What happens when the war is over and we're left with a population of genetic warriors who no longer think like normal humans?" Turner's expression was grim. "That's a problem for after we survive this. Right now, the alternative to becoming monsters is becoming extinct." The Devourer fleet was now only days away from human space. Their scouts had reported the destruction of the advance force, but the machine intelligence commanding the invasion seemed unconcerned. They had consumed thousands of species over millions of years. They had seen every form of resistance the galaxy could offer, but they had never encountered a species that had spent 3 centuries preparing for this exact moment. They had never faced an enemy that had turned their entire civilization into a hidden weapon, and they had never fought humans who remembered what they were truly capable of when backed into a corner. The first phase of the war was about to begin, and humanity was no longer the peaceful species that the Devourers remembered. They were becoming something else, something that their own ancestors might not recognize as human. But they would be alive, and their enemies would not. In the end, that was all that mattered. The Devourer main fleet arrived at the edge of human space, like a plague of mechanical locusts. Admiral Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of the Terra's Wrath, watching the sensor displays with the cold calculation of her warrior ancestor. 3 million enemy vessels stretched across light years of space, each one larger than a human city. "Ares," she commanded, "tactical analysis of enemy formation." The ship's AI processed the data with inhuman speed. Enemy fleet is configured for systematic consumption operations. They are moving in waves designed to overwhelm planetary defenses and establish processing stations. However, their formation assumes minimal resistance. Harper smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "They're about to learn how wrong that assumption is. Signal the fleet. Implement the Centauri Gambit." The Centauri Gambit was a battle plan that her ancestor had developed during the final wars, but never had the chance to use. It called for a coordinated assault across multiple star systems simultaneously, using humanity's hidden weapons to strike at targets that the enemy couldn't defend all at once. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker looked up from her tactical station. "Admiral, all vessels report ready. The Mars battle fleet is in position. Europa's defense grid is charged. And Titan is moving into attack position." The sight of Titan under power was something that would haunt the survivors for generations. The massive moonship accelerated away from Saturn with engines that turned space itself into a river of fire. Her hull, which had appeared to be natural rock and ice, transformed as weapon systems emerged from camouflaged positions. On the bridge of Titan, Dr. Alex Wong found himself commanding the most powerful mobile weapon ever built by human hands. The transformation of the artificial moon had activated genetic memories he didn't know he possessed, and now he understood the terrible purpose his ancestors had built into this disguised fortress. "Titan control to all vessels," he announced, "over the quantum communication network. We are go for Operation Hammerfall. All units prepare for synchronized assault." The Devourers had arranged their fleet in what their machine intelligence considered an optimal formation for consuming the human colonies. Their processing ships hung back while their combat vessels moved forward to eliminate resistance. It was a formation they had used successfully for millions of years, but they had never faced an enemy that could attack from impossible directions. The battle began when Europa's defense grid fired. The focusing arrays that Commander Lisa Parker had activated turned the entire moon into a massive weapon that could project concentrated energy across interstellar space. The beam that lanced out from Jupiter's orbit moved at the speed of light and struck the Devourer fleet's rear guard with the force of a supernova. 50,000 enemy ships simply ceased to exist in the first second of the engagement. The Devourer fleet began to turn, their machine intelligence recognizing the threat and attempting to adjust their formation. But they were too late. The Mars battle fleet, led by engineer Katie Wells aboard the newly constructed dreadnought Humanity's Vengeance, micro-jumped into the heart of the enemy formation using quantum displacement drives. The Devourer ships found themselves surrounded by human vessels that appeared from nowhere and immediately began firing weapons that violated several laws of physics. Antimatter cascade warheads unraveled the basic structure of space-time around their targets. Reality manipulation systems turned enemy vessels inside out, and quantum torpedoes simply deleted their targets from existence. "Mars fleet to Titan command," Katie reported, her voice carrying the cold efficiency that all the genetic carriers had developed. "We have achieved tactical surprise. Enemy response is disorganized. Initiating Phase 2. Phase 2 was even more devastating." The Terra's Wrath and her sister ships, armed with weapons that had been considered too dangerous to use during the final wars, began their assault on the Devourer command vessels. These ships were massive, each one the size of a small moon, but they had been designed for consumption and processing, not combat against an enemy that fought back. Admiral Harper watched as her plasma cannons carved through enemy hulls like hot knives through butter. The Devourer's elegant, efficient designs became liabilities when faced with weapons specifically created to destroy rather than process. But the most shocking moment came when Titan herself entered the battle. Dr. Wong, his mind now completely merged with the tactical knowledge of his ancestors, piloted the massive moonship directly into the thickest concentration of enemy vessels. Titan's hull, reinforced with materials that existed only in theoretical physics textbooks, smashed through Devourer ships like they were made of paper. "Titan is go for ramming attack," Wong announced calmly. "All vessels clear the target zone." What followed defied description. Titan, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, plowed through the center of the Devourer fleet like a wrecking ball through a spider web. Enemy ships were vaporized by the sheer kinetic energy of her passage. Others were caught in her gravitational wake and torn apart by tidal forces. In less than an hour, 3 million Devourer ships were reduced to scattered debris and a few hundred survivors fleeing into deep space. But the real shock came when the Devourer Central Intelligence, housed in a processing station the size of a small planet, attempted to communicate. "Unknown species," the machine voice echoed across all frequencies. "You fight with patterns we do not recognize. Your tactics violate optimal efficiency protocols. Explain your strategic logic." Admiral Harper took the communication personally. She looked into the main screen at the massive alien construct and spoke with the voice of humanity's accumulated rage. "We don't fight for efficiency," she said. "We fight to win. And we fight dirty." The final phase of the battle demonstrated exactly what she meant. Captain Jake Morrison, aboard the Horizon's Edge, led a boarding action against the Devourer Central Processing Station. His ship, upgraded with weaponry that violated several treaties from the final wars, punched through the station's defenses like they weren't there. Lieutenant Bobby Chen, now completely transformed into the genetic heir of General Susan Chen, led the assault team into the heart of the enemy installation. They carried weapons that didn't just kill, they taught their targets what human tactical thinking was like from the inside. The Devourer intelligence experienced something it had never encountered in millions of years of galactic consumption. Pure human tactical genius applied without mercy or restraint. For the first time in its existence, the machine mind knew fear. "Your species," it transmitted in its final moments, "does not compute. You sacrifice efficiency for unpredictability. You choose destruction over processing. You are irrational." Bobby. Chen's response was the last thing the Devourer intelligence ever heard. "That's what makes us human." The processing station exploded in a cascade of antimatter that could be seen from neighboring star systems. With their central intelligence destroyed, the surviving Devourer ships became nothing more than mindless drones, easily mopped up by human cleanup crews. In the aftermath of the battle, as reports came in from across human space, the scope of the victory became clear. Humanity had not just defeated the Devourers. They had annihilated them so completely that the machine intelligence would never threaten the galaxy again. But the cost was becoming obvious. The genetic carriers who had led the battle were no longer recognizably human. They moved with predatory grace, spoke in clipped tactical language, and showed no emotion except a cold satisfaction in their complete victory. Dr. Nina Foster, monitoring the transformation from Earth, realized with growing horror that humanity had won the war by becoming something else. The gentle, peaceful species that had awakened the war vaults no longer existed. In their place stood apex predators who had just demonstrated that they could destroy threats on a galactic scale. President Rodriguez, watching the victory reports come in, asked the question that everyone was thinking: "What have we become, General?" Turner, now the only high-ranking officer who still retained fully human emotions, gave the only answer he could. "We've become what we needed to become to survive. The question now is whether we can remember how to be human again." But as he looked at the tactical displays showing human warships patrolling the galaxy with ruthless efficiency, he wondered if they would want to. 6 months after the destruction of the Devourer fleet, humanity stood at a crossroads that would define their species for millennia to come. The war was over, but the warriors who had won it were no longer the same people who had lived in peace for 3 centuries. President Alex Rodriguez stood before the reformed Global Council, looking out at faces that had changed in ways that went far beyond the physical. The genetic carriers who had saved humanity were present, but they were different now. They moved with predatory precision, spoke in tactical terms, and viewed the world through the cold lens of strategic calculation. "The question before us," Alex began, "is what kind of species we want to be going forward. We have proven that we can defend ourselves against any threat. But in doing so, we have become something that our ancestors might not recognize as human." Admiral Lisa Harper rose from her seat. She was still recognizable as the woman who had once overseen peaceful defense protocols. But there was something predatory in her movements now. Her transformation had been more complete than most, and she spoke with the accumulated tactical wisdom of humanity's greatest military minds. "Mr. President," she said, "with respect, the question isn't whether we've changed. We have. The question is whether we accept that change or try to reverse it." General Sam Turner, now the only high-ranking military officer who retained fully human emotions and perspective, stood up slowly. At 79, he was the last living link to humanity's peaceful past. Admiral Harper speaks the truth, he said. But we need to understand what we've lost as well as what we've gained. The people in this room won the greatest military victory in galactic history. But they're no longer capable of the empathy, creativity, and wonder that made our species worth saving in the first place. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. The genetic carriers had become perfect warriors, but in the process, they had lost much of what made them human. Dr. Nina Foster, who had monitored the genetic transformations throughout. The war activated a holographic display showing brain scans from before and after the awakening. The differences were stark and undeniable. The neural pathways associated with empathy, artistic creativity, and emotional bonding have been suppressed in all genetic carriers, she explained. In their place, we see enhanced tactical processing, strategic thinking, and combat reflexes. They're more efficient, but they're also fundamentally different people. Lieutenant Bobby Chen, who had once been an enthusiastic young archaeologist, spoke with the cold precision that had replaced his former personality. Dr. Foster, efficiency is survival. Our previous emotional patterns were a luxury that nearly led to extinction. The transformation was necessary. Captain Jake Morrison, who had watched his young officer change throughout the war, felt a deep sadness. Bobby, do you remember why you became an archaeologist? Do you remember the wonder you felt when we discovered ancient civilizations? Bobby considered the question with the same tactical analysis he applied to everything now. I remember the data, Captain, but the emotional associations are no longer relevant to my function. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the outer monitoring stations. Commander Amy Davis, still stationed on Luna Base, appeared on the main screen with news that would change everything. Mr. President, she announced, we're receiving communications from across the galaxy. Alien species that survived the Devourer attacks are requesting contact with humanity. They want to know who we are and what our intentions are. The implications were staggering. For millions of years, the galaxy had lived in fear of the periodic Devourer awakenings. Now, for the first time in galactic history, someone had actually defeated them. Every surviving species wanted to understand how it had been done and whether humanity represented a new threat or a new hope. Admiral Harper reviewed the communication logs with her enhanced tactical mind. We are receiving requests from 47 different species. Some are offering trade agreements. Others are requesting protection, and a few are asking if we plan to establish a galactic empire. President Rodriguez felt the weight of galactic history settling on his shoulders. How do we respond? We can't pretend to be the peaceful species we were before the war. But do we want to become galactic conquerors? The answer came from an unexpected source. Engineer Katie Wells, who had become the most efficient shipbuilder in human history during her transformation, spoke up from her position at the council table. We established the new covenant, she said with mechanical precision. We offer protection to those who accept human oversight. We eliminate those who pose strategic threats. We expand human influence through calculated application of superior force. Her words sent a chill through the room. This was the logical endpoint of their transformation. Humanity as the galaxy's apex predator, ruling through strength rather than cooperation. But General Turner had one final card to play. He had been working with Dr. Foster on a secret project, using genetic therapy techniques developed during the final wars. There is another option, he announced. Dr. Foster and I have been developing a treatment that can partially reverse the genetic changes. It won't eliminate the tactical knowledge or combat capabilities, but it can restore the emotional and creative faculties that make us human. The genetic carriers reacted to this news with their characteristic tactical analysis. Admiral Harper was the first to speak. General, such a treatment would reduce our efficiency by approximately 30%. It would reintroduce emotional vulnerabilities that could compromise strategic decision-making. Yes, Turner replied. It would make us human again. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most important in human history. The genetic carriers argued for maintaining their enhanced state, pointing out that the galaxy was still dangerous and that humanity needed to remain strong. The unmodified humans argued for restoration, claiming that survival without humanity was meaningless. In the end, it was President Rodriguez who proposed the compromise that would define humanity's future. We implement both approaches, he announced. We establish the new covenant as our public policy toward the galaxy. Humanity will offer protection to those who accept our guidance, and we will defend against those who threaten galactic peace. But we do this as humans, not as machines. The new covenant, as it came to be known, was a document that shocked the galaxy with its audacity and its restraint. Humanity declared itself the galaxy's protector, promising to defend against threats, like the Devourers, while respecting the autonomy of peaceful species. But the most important part of the covenant was internal. Humanity would maintain the war vaults and their genetic warriors, but they would balance that strength with restored humanity. The genetic treatment would be offered to all carriers, allowing them to choose between efficiency and empathy. Some chose to remain as they were, becoming humanity's eternal guardians. Admiral Harper and her tactical officers remained in their enhanced state, commanding fleets that patrolled the galaxy with ruthless efficiency. They were no longer fully human, but they were humanity's sword and shield against the darkness. Others chose the treatment, regaining their emotional depth while retaining their tactical knowledge. Lieutenant Bobby Chen was among these, slowly rediscovering his wonder at ancient civilizations while keeping the strategic mind that had helped save his species. The galaxy watched with fascination and fear as humanity established its new role. The gentle traders and peaceful explorers were still there, but now everyone knew what lay beneath the surface. Behind every human diplomat's smile was the genetic memory of warriors who had destroyed a galactic threat in a matter of hours. Alien species had to choose: accept humanity's protection under the new covenant, or risk finding themselves classified as a potential threat to galactic peace. Most chose wisely.